Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever part of the world you're joining in. I'm Dr. Nandini Murali, and I'm delighted to share space with you for this very, very interesting session on transforming and perhaps even transcending through trauma, using the power of stories to heal and restore us. I'd like to begin by giving us a little context and a few guidelines which would help us to optimize the 1.5 hours we're going to be spending together. One is that I'd like to reiterate that this is a safe, supportive, inclusive space for conversation. So therefore, I invite you to step into a sacred space of learning and sharing. While this is a candid space, I would expect each of you to make a choice about how much you want to share and with whom you want to share, because that I think is very, very important. That said, you might be wondering why I have a personal connect with this session. Here's the context. A few years back, maybe 6 years back, my life changed forever. I lost my husband very, very tragically. He was a very well-known doctor. He was a well-known urologist who died of a suicide. Until then, suicide was something that happened to other people in other families, not to me, not in my family. But of course, when that event happened, it changed my life upside down, inside out. But I was determined not to let it overwhelm me. I'd like to believe I have the sensibility of a writer, sensitivity and the sensibility of a writer. I have published earlier too. And this time I decided I needed to make sense of what had happened to me. They were raw wounds, that is, I think I'm putting it very, very mildly. And I needed to heal through the whole process. And the only way I needed to heal was through writing. I started off by maintaining a journal, I think right from the second day of the tragedy. And today I have the journal with me. I wish I'd got it here, but I just forgot. And a year later, I was surprised when that journal had the seeds or the kernel of what was to be a book. And a year later, I started writing. And 2 years after the tragedy, this was my book, Left Behind, Surviving Suicide Loss. When I look back, when I retrospect, writing that book was a deeply healing and a meaningful journey for me. It was a very, very inward journey. It was a very, very transformative journey. It was a very challenging journey as well, wherein I had to confront a lot of aspects about myself, things I may not have had the courage to confront. It was a very, very inward, solitary journey. Very often people ask me, oh, didn't you find it traumatizing to write about something as traumatic as that? And my simple answer to that question is, it was not in the least traumatizing. Why? Because I chose to tell that story. I decided that I needed to reframe the narrative of suicide loss and suicide grief, as we all know, is a very disenfranchised form of grief. It's very simple. It's a big word, but actually it means when you lose someone to suicide, you can't usually talk about it. You can't tell people what you're going through. There's very little social validation, and people are not empathetic or supportive. In fact, they're very, very judgmental. Particularly where women are concerned, I think there are huge gender dimensions to suicide loss, and women are the worst affected. I was very aware of all these aspects. And in the Indian context, I found that nobody had written about this journey. And my inspiration for writing this book was a journalist and a suicide prevention activist. She lives in New York. I don't know, I have this thing for New Yorkers, Kala Fine. Hers was the first book I read when I was recently bereaved. And I was simply struck by how similar our journeys were. And then I wrote to Kala, and the second minute I had an email from her saying how much she understood what I was going through. And since the last 6 years, Kala and I share a deep sisterhood. And to my surprise, I found that there was no similar narrative in the Indian context. Why is it that nobody in India has written about it? Is it that we don't have the problem? So that was how Left Behind came about. The reason I'm setting this context is when we write about trauma or grief or something that has really impacted us very deeply, if you come into that space from a lived experience perspective, I think it makes all the difference. So this is a grief memoir, and I'd like to read a couple of pages from this because I think it would set the context, maybe just a couple of minutes. The last chapter of my book is called The Oyster and the Pearl, and even the cover of the book has the picture of the seashore and an oyster shell and a pearl. As we all know, an oyster forms a pearl only when it is deeply irritated. No pain, no pearl. So that is the last chapter. And incidentally, the first year after my husband's death, I just happened to go to the seashore in Rameshwaram, which is in the south of Tamil Nadu. And there I found that I was walking along a primal seashore, and I found a fisher who had gone to the sea, and he had given me an oyster shell with 7 bright iridescent pearls. And for me, 1 year after the journey, I felt I had sunk deep into the ocean of grief. And when I resurfaced, I found pearls of wisdom. And my last chapter talks about some of the pearls of wisdom I picked up along my journey. I'll just read a couple of them. I spread before you the pearls from my underwater exploration, which helped me navigate the grieving process and learn to engage with life meaningfully. Accept your loss. Your life has changed forever. The loss is irreversible. Your tears, longing, pity, piety, nothing can alter the outcome. Stop asking, why me? There are no answers. Instead, ask, why not? And ask, what next? Take ownership of your life. You and you alone are responsible for your life. Whether you yield or transform, the choice is yours. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. You had no control over the cause, but you can control the outcome by choosing how to respond. So that was to give you an idea of what the writing process looks like. Of course, I'd like to also insert a disclaimer here. I cannot promise you that at the end of 1.5 hours, we'd all be experts in writing grief memoirs or in processing trauma, but at least we know where to begin. So here's what I would like to do for us in the next couple of hours. Just give me a second. Yeah. So we are at 12:20 now. The next 15 to 20 minutes, I'm going to give us all a writing stem. And I would like us to write about it, write based on that writing stem. There is nothing right or wrong. Please don't censor yourself. Please don't be overly concerned about grammar, punctuation. Do not self-edit. Just write whatever emerges. When you write, my only pointer would be get into a space of stillness. Find that sacred, sweet spot within yourself and write from that space. We would spend the next 15 minutes, say, writing. And then Eric will put us into breakout rooms where we can choose to share what we have written with our partner. And then we come back to the main room. And if you're called to share what you've written, please do so. Would anyone want any clarifications? I could read out the writing stem. we can have two writing stems. You know, one is when I woke up the next morning, I experienced a deep sense of stillness. I was a new person, just born, forged in the crucible of tragedy. I'll repeat, when I woke up next morning, I experienced a deep sense of stillness. I was a new person, just born, forged in the crucible of tragedy. Would you want me to repeat? I could do so, or maybe I'll put it in the chat.
Did you say there's a second one? What's the second one?
Yeah, the second one is, as I walked along the seashore, what I saw changed my life forever. As I walked along the seashore, what I saw changed my life forever.
Could this be extended to any major loss? I mean, does it have to only refer to the death of a loved one, or can it be any major loss?
Lovely question, Eric. I think we can extend it to any kind of loss, not necessarily death-related losses. Mm-hmm. It could be non-death related losses as well. Loss is loss and grief is grief. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we'll just write for about 10 minutes where we are.
Sure. I can even put it up on the chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll stop recording for 10 minutes.
Sure.